Welcome, everybody. My name is Stephen Dupont. I am the editor of Compass Magazine, and I'm a board member for the Association of Professional Futurists. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We have a very interesting session here before us, and I think it goes directly to who we are, what makes a futurist. And I'm sure that many of you in this room have encountered the question from somebody. I know I did on the airplane coming out here. So what is it exactly you do as a futurist? What is a futurist? So the backbone of this session is this publication, which there's some copies over here. Please take them with you. They're also on the second floor in the book corner, and this is a very special edition of Compass Magazine. We partnered, the Association of Professional Futurists partnered with the Global Future Society and with the Dubai Futures Forum to create this special issue. We invited over 12 futurists across the world from representing every region to share their thoughts about what makes a futurist. And we have 3 of our colleagues here who contributed to this very special issue, and I'm going to introduce them now to you after I grab my note. And by the way, if you look back here, there's also a QR code here. You can download a digital version of this issue too. It's available at the apf.org website as well as the Global Futures website. So, our panelists. Mila Funrouge Anne is a more than a human designer, feminist, and pataphysician from Argentina, Buenos Aires. Her work relies on participatory methodologies and creative ethnography to understand, reimagine, and transform how we inhabit the worlds we are a part of. Welcome, Mila.
Thanks.
Elias Mouawad is a strategic innovation and foresight specialist focused on MENA, and he is the co-founder of the Arab Future Society. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Dr. Bree Trevina is an Australian-based foresight practitioner with a decidedly anti-disciplinary background, mixing complexity theory, arts, policy, and practice, service design, and infrastructure delivery. Bree works with the Foresight Group at the international engineering business consulting firm, Arab. Thank you. Welcome, coming all the way from Australia. So here's how we're going to do this. I have 4 prepared questions for this conversation that we'll start, and then afterward we'll invite you to share your own thoughts. And so I invite you, as you're listening to this conversation, to reflect on what makes a futurist, and to think about your own identity, your purpose, and why it is you're here exactly, and what you want us to be. Okay, so Mila, let's start with you. From your perspective or your experience, how would you define what a futurist is? Is it a mindset? We heard that in the last presentation up here. Somebody brought up the question of mindset. Is it a discipline or a profession? Or is it a responsibility? Are we all potentially futurists? How would you answer that?
I cannot define it, but I could try a possible meaning. I think no futurist is like another futurist. No futurist stays the same, and there's no such thing as a futurist.
Okay.
But futurists, kind of like an IWI instead of an I, entangled. I call them entangled movements, and I call them absurd beings. So let me explain a bit this IWI. When you introduced me, you said Mila and. That and is an artifact. It acknowledges the voices and ideas that inform my ideas, but it also acknowledges that we're part of interconnected systems of relations. So imagine that we are in a rhizome where we interact with other existences, human and more than human, like trees, rivers, and in each of those encounters, in each of those everyday encounters, we play our values or we live our values in a certain way. And that is when past, futures, and present meet. And that's when we transform ourselves and we transform the systems of relations we are part of. So basically what I'm trying to say is that we all are responsible, but not equally responsible for how those encounters happen, for how we co-design those worlds. So I guess maybe absurd beings could be those unbecoming and becoming with other existences. About the profession, I wanted to, I think that absurd beings not necessarily have a profession or practice a discipline. Some futurists are interdisciplinary, some are antidisciplinary, and I guess some of them do not know what the discipline is, and I think that's fine. They serve within entrenched institutions and systems and help us, they're like facilitators to help us imagine things otherwise, but also allow us to slow down and think about questions like whose needs, dreams, desires, temporalities, human and more than human, are being considered when we design a service, a product, a public policy. They help us to question who are we in these rhizomatic systems, in these more than human worlds. And maybe to clarify a bit and to conclude, I will give 2 examples of what I think an absurd being could be. But if you think about examples yourself and then you want to share them, you're welcome. So the first one is related to a short story. A few weeks ago, I was walking through a wetland, but it doesn't look like a wetland anymore. It's parking lots and pavement basically everywhere. And I saw this plant growing through the cracks of the cement, and I took a picture of it. I register most of the things I encounter when I'm walking around. And I thought, this is an absurd being, because it's resisting, and it's telling me, or telling us, histories of control. It's a reminder of histories of control, of human exceptionalism, which is a form of inequality, if you think about it. And the other example that comes to my mind are the rivers and the Yakumama Amazon flotilla that together went to the COP30. So climate policies are designed with them and considering their ancestral wisdom and right. So basically, what I think is that absurd beings are imagining futures that are not built upon extractivism or exclusion, but rather they're entangled with interspecies and intergenerational responsibilities.
Okay, thank you. Bree, how would you respond to that question?
So the article that I contributed to for this magazine, I actually wrote with 2 colleagues, Tobias Revel and Charlie Warwick, who I work with at Arup, and it really kicked off a big conversation about how we see ourselves practicing in that space, and how we define that. So our conversation, very much like a kind of kitchen dinner debate, was around, well, I'm a designer, but my practice is in the future. That is kind of the focus that I look at. For others, it was much more around strategic foresight and that methodology and approach. And for others still, it was much more about, well, really I look at behavioural, socio-technical systems and how they come together. So in terms of that disciplinary methodology, it's really a kind of mix of those things with an orientation and a philosophy that is focused on that mindset about asking questions about the future, understanding that we are operating in our past and our present in a really relational ways that are full of people and stuff and institutions and ecosystems, and thinking about how these work together, and understanding that while we can't predict the future, one thing that we can be pretty confident of is that we will continue to be operating in this space of negotiation, contestation, collaboration, and really focusing on how do we then work to ask questions about that. So really kind of what we came out with in this is that being a futurist is for us about being useful. So not necessarily about being right, but how do we help others to question their assumptions? How do we help to surface those assumptions? And then critically, how do we make sure that we are putting assumptions and voices and presences on the table who aren't already there?
And Elia?
I mean, if we think of a futurist as a responsibility to open up options, right? I think it's all of these things and done at different times, right? Yeah. So, and what you've offered as mindset, discipline, and responsibility, of course, answer the how, what, and why, right? And those things are applied and thought of at different points in time. So responsibility, of course, beyond our human systems, right? Beyond our generation. So there is a responsibility part that we cannot shy away from as responsible people, as a responsible practice. While responsibility might mean very different things to many different people, right? The discipline is, yes, how do we keep the plurality? How do we keep some dissidence in that offering? Right? So it's all of those, not to add too much, I think the colleagues covered it quite well. I think it's all of those at different times, at different depth, at the same time, and sometimes not at all.
I'm hearing a thread here. Is it fair to say that we all agree that it is maybe a combination of all of those, but the underlying thread here is it's a responsibility. We are here in service to others. Is that fair to say? Yeah. Let me ask you, Bree, on this next one. So, in a world shaped with uncertainty, there's plenty of that nowadays. What is the essential purpose of futurists? And let me throw in a curveball on this one. Do you feel on purpose being a futurist?
Big questions today, Steve. I'm going to talk about this from the space that I practice in, so that is very much kind of built environment space. And for us, that essential purpose is to understand that when we're talking about the built environment, we are really talking about these complex systems for living. So these are spaces that are technical, yes, they're physical, yes, and material, but they are also social, they are economic, they are political within that environment. And in terms of how we then start to think about that from a futures and a foresight perspective, part of our responsibility, part of our mindset, and part of our practice in this space, and how we see ourselves, I suppose, as essential within that, is to work with others who are practicing in the built environment to help them ensure that they are aware and conscious of the fact that those things that they are developing and building are full of assumptions, they are full of values, they are full of framings about what the future looks like. If you are designing a master plan or a railway system, you are designing an idea of the future that is likely to be built, it is likely to be enduring, it may be there for 50, 100 more years. So really, in terms of that kind of essential purpose in that space, for us it is about ensuring that those people that we work with are really considering the fact that they themselves are operating in a futures practice, whether that is next week, next decade, or 100 years forward, and ensuring that they are considering that as both the kind of responsibility but also the opportunity that that is. In terms of your kind of question about purpose, what sort of world do we want to be living in? What sort of world do we want our future generations to be living in? And then critically, what does that mean to be living in that space with other species, with other worldviews, and with other knowledges?
What about you, Mila? How would you answer that?
I will add when she was talking, a quote came to my mind.
Yeah.
Octavia Butler, she says, you cannot something like this. You cannot dismantle, the master tools cannot dismantle the mastered house. I think it's like that. And I think futurists make a practice out of it. I think what she was saying is that we create these spaces and sometimes like tools to help us navigate entrenched spaces. Like, for example, that tools could be participatory methods or I think speculative artifacts, storytelling. I created, for example, a deck of cards. So I know a lot of people in the Foresight and Futurism work with tarot cards, and I think that's really useful to help us to talk through our values, our biases, become aware of or reflect about how our background, history, and privileges affect how we relate with each other and how we think ourselves in the world.
Elias?
I think it's a tough question. I think, and that one that we need to keep in mind all the time. Trying to reflect on this, I think futurists are to hold multiplicities and contradictions within them first before offering them to others. And by that, I mean, be very clear about the things that you want to do, but not be wedded to them, right? Be very anchored and while keeping your practice loose. Be very focused while not losing sight of what's broader, what's more important, what's to become. And I think there's also an aspect of it that is also a bit more ethical, right? And I feel in the times we are in now, but this is an increased responsibility, not to show one side of ethics, not to be applying it from I know better, no, but again to hold that different multiplicity of ethics within the practice. And by that, I mean, there's few things that we can support people to step back from. Again, the generational lens, our cultural and social and economic lenses, our again human centricity versus broader centricity. I don't know what that is. So there's a aspect where we can help people to take a step back, right? But also approach things with more humility, with more discipline. So to go back again to discipline and work and function. So it's too many things at the same time, at different levels, and different temporalities, with different people.
Let me ask it in another way. Do you all feel like you were meant to be a futurist? Do you feel like you're doing what you were meant to do?
I'm a recovering political scientist, right? So I find refuge in Foresight and Futures because it is much more multidimensional and multitemporal, right? And and holds things loose while very structured and disciplined. So that was my out of political science.
Okay. Bree, what do you think?
It's a good question. And I'm not sure it's one that I've ever kind of contemplated before, and I think that is in part because the way that I think most everybody on stage, but also probably most of you operate, is that I don't necessarily distinctly think of myself as a futurist. The way I think of myself is more around helping to understand and thinking through myself what are the kind of implications of the decisions that we are making today. So that absolutely lands in the future, it lands in place, it lands in a whole lot of these different environments, but while I kind of work in this practice and the framing of it is very much around these futures, for me it is around, well, what are we doing today? And how do we start to think about that in a way that takes some responsibility and some agency for our decisions, and where possible understands where we are seeing shifts towards things that we either might like to see in the world or we might like to see less in the world, and how we can put energy behind that now.
What about you, Mila?
Well, my background is a mixture of art, anthropology, international relations, and I guess what I don't know if I define myself as a futurist, but more like an absorbing. So what I like is that I get to imagine and work with other beings and people imagining, and that way, for me, it's like an act of resistance, of participation, and I don't get to feel trapped in somebody else's world-building exercise of what it could be. So,
Yeah. Now, just to clarify, do all three of you come to, you're here at this stage, do you come to this from another profession? Like Bree, possibly engineering, or do you come from other professions into futurist work?
But a future is entangled with all professions and with no professions at all.
Okay.
So
That's fair.
Yeah, 100%. I think, I mean, it's entangled and it's additional, right? And it's
all part of it. Okay. So let me ask you this. The Dubai Future Forum gathers futurists from across countries, 103 countries to be exact, across disciplines. In your opinion, how does coming together as a community shape or define what it means to be a futurist today? So I'll start with Mila on that one first. What do you think? And
Okay.
maybe we have to define what community is, right?
Yeah, that was one of the questions, like, what is the community? I mean, how do you think about a forum? Is the forum like a 4-day meeting?
Yeah, in this case.
Okay, I don't think about the forum that way. For example, I think it's an event that doesn't have a beginning and an ending,
Okay.
and there are paths transforming right now and futures emerging as we're talking, or I don't know, in the exhibitions of the projects of solutions in the other part of the towers.
Right, yeah.
Okay, and I think, I think that. What matters is not only that we're getting together, but is how we get to these encounters. And again, I'm going to quote David Kopenawa from the Yanomami people. He says that those who only dream of themselves never get out of themselves, and in that case, the world becomes too small. And I think he's talking about this thing of that we get together, but it's not just being in this place together, like with the panel and the magazine. I mean, that's part of it, but it's reflecting and getting to shift our ways of thinking and doing through interacting with each other.
Yeah, that makes sense. Elias?
I think this is a great opportunity. Honestly, I know this is not the best, not the only one, but probably has the most wide-ranging. And I think for many reasons. First, it adds to the layer of what we learn and how we connect. Right? And I think this is ever expanding and more. And the more different profiles there are, the more potential, at least, there is to learn. I know it's too compact, but there's always that. So the highlight is the event, and then the traces that you keep after the event are also very important. So this is more on the conceptual level. On a more personal level, I think this is we owe it to the FF specifically, 2024, for the Arab Future Society. That was the moment where we always then thought, okay, we are here. Some of us are present, right? We have a story to tell, and we have a voice for everyone to hear. So how do we use that platform today, right, to share that story, to tell others that we exist, to learn from others as well, and piggyback on that momentum, right, to drive us forward. So I'll take this opportunity, if you don't mind, and also extend an invite to all my fellow Arabs, to practitioners, aficionados, professionals, right, to join us. This is an open invitation. I think this is at the heart of such an event and forum and connection.
Right. Not just a space, but a place to come together. What about you, Bree?
To take this from, I guess, a slightly different perspective, I agree with what you folks have said. For me, this is also an incredibly important event and gathering because of place. A lot of the conversations that we have, a lot of the dominant discussions and languages and approaches often come from quite a Eurocentric perspective. So having this particular gathering here, as someone who is working and practicing in the Asia Pacific, is also an incredibly kind of rich and useful and rewarding experience of hearing people's different perspective on futures and how we think about time and how we think about cycles of relationships from many different perspectives. And I think there are probably few events that actually are able to bring, as you said, so many people from different perspectives and backgrounds who are practicing in this space with such a kind of diversity of approaches, but also of philosophies of how we understand working in futures and foresight. So I think there is something kind of extraordinarily powerful about that convening and having it located here in these particular parts of the world that we don't necessarily hear commentary from as much on a global stage when we're talking about futures and that kind of dominant rhetoric.
Right. That kind of leads to my next question here about, do you feel that you belong to a global community? And the key word here is belonging. Do you feel it's not just about fitting in, but do you feel that there's a sense of belonging here in this room, here with others, hear in all the folks that you deal with when you go back home, that this community that maybe we don't necessarily call ourselves futurists sometimes, but we are all constantly thinking about the future and how to make the world better. What about you, Mila? What do you think about that?
Now I'm going to say that's a tough question. But my feel of belonging is full of deviations, antinomies, and alignments, I guess. If I could listen to this belonging, it would be like a polyphony. So, I don't know, conversations, the sea, the wind, bulldozers. If I could taste it, it would be like mango, so sometimes it's sweet, or like mate amargo, which is an Argentinian drink, which can be bitter. And why I say this, because as an abstract being, I get to imagine, and imagining is an exercise of power. And in the act of imagining otherwise, I feel that I and we contest dominant logics of power. We open the space for uncomfortable conversations, to possibilities. And in my case, personally, this means that sometimes this is a feeling of joy, collaboration, but sometimes it's also grief and healing. And actually, the piece that I wrote for the magazine was part of my healing process. I got to hear a lot of things. One of the things that I was told was that you shouldn't use those words if you want to survive in this organization. And the words I was using was imagining otherwise and interspecies collaboration. And I'm thinking, why do I have to use other words that are not describing the future that I and other beings and other groups of people who has been historically marginalized are imagining, right? It's like, I call it borrow words. And actually, why do I have to use words or human language? Anyway, I think my belong exists, persists, and sometimes feels like that, kind of like shaky. But it's strengthening when I participate with communities. But I wouldn't say that when I'm accepted by the global community, because I think it's not about acceptance, it's about participating.
Yeah.
And not in a global community, but I feel more in a plural, pluriverse of multi-species communities of futurists, if you want. Because for me, a forest is a community, a neighborhood is a community, this is a community, Women Who Futurists is a community, and I belong to all of them, and I belong to a diverse community, even those communities where maybe growing or rewilding has the same value as having a PhD or a master's degree. That.
Okay. And Elias, what do you think about the word belonging as it relates to the futures community?
I think if it's a space for shared concern, right?
Yeah.
Shared excitement, right? Shared concern and excitement mostly. I think yes, right? At some points more than others, of course. You know, it's not a consistent feeling that one has. And I think I do feel that. And I think it's also layered, right? That shows up in different ways with different people and in different conversations very differently, right? But as a human connection specifically, I do feel that, again, regardless of the amount of people, you know, and the level of conversation. But yeah, if it's a comfortable space, you know, one of safe space and a comfortable space, I think, yes, I can say I do feel that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about you, Bree?
I'm also going to pick up on something you asked before, which is how do we define community in that space? And there is something really powerful about communities don't just come together because of geographic proximity. You know, communities come together because we have shared projects and interests and concerns. And I think something that is kind of quite remarkable about this community is that there is this kind of shared approach that we are not only invested in what happens in the future, but there is a belief that we can collectively make change within that space. And I think that in and of itself is an inclusive project, but there is always a challenge, I think, for us in this community, engaging with others, to acknowledge that many people who are practicing are not necessarily professionally practicing in this space as well, that there are incredible communities and community organisers and activities that are actively going out, making, shaping and framing those futures. So I think a lot of our work is, yes, I feel like I guess I belong in a professional practice, part of my own personal project and focus, and something I hope that we can all share is making sure that we are then going out and engaging with others who are active in that space, whether they use that formal title or not.
One thing I wanted to ask all of you, we probably have some young people here in the audience, those who are thinking about entering this space of future thinking. Knowing what you know now, what advice would you give them? Or if you want to go take it from another perspective, what would you tell your 18-year-old self about being here on this stage and this work that you were doing? Elias?
My first thought is you're late to get into the game. So do it sooner.
Do it sooner.
Go in, go right ahead, jump in,
Yeah.
Explore further. Yeah.
Do you wish you had discovered this sooner in your career?
I think so. I think so. It would. I think it would have. I mean, I realize that I'm not here without my previous experiences, and that is, of course, a build-up. I think, at the same time, have I been in something like this before? Probably I would have had a very different community around me, right? A very different approach to my challenges, be it personal and social, right? And the vision of generally life, right?
Okay. And Mila, what about you?
You're never too late. I think maybe it's a process, not way of being is the only way possible. So you arrive when you arrive. What would I say?
Who would you tell your 18-year-old self? Would you say do this work or not do this work or do something completely different?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes. Just stay bold. It doesn't matter that sometimes you're pushed away. Depends, sometimes like where the place where you're coming from, or your race or your gender or whatever, you get excluded because of that, and you feel it. And I would tell myself, just go, you'll get somewhere, and you get to work with communities, with beings, with roots, with biomaterials, collaborate with other beings, and I think that's amazing. It's what reconnects me with my sense of wonder constantly. So I would definitely say yes, go.
Okay, and Bree, what about you?
My 18-year-old self was studying in this space, and then my 19-year-old self thought that's not going to be a very useful thing for you to do. So I ended up going into the arts sector, which I'm not sure why I thought that was necessarily going to be more useful in terms of employment prospects. But then I kind of came back to this practice because I realized that what it really is helping myself and other people to have really honest and strategic conversations about change. So that was already something that was happening in kind of policy work, in urban design work, and in arts practice. The kind of common thread behind all of this is how do we understand, how do we conceptualize, how do we build agency in the face of, or else help to understand and adapt to change within those spaces. So I probably would have told my 18-year-old self to stick with it, you'll be okay within that space. But also I think there is kind of incredible value in understanding that often many of us are kind of practicing in this space, again, whether we have that kind of formal framing to it or not. And at the moment, as things feel like they are incredibly accelerating and the kind of complexity starts to feel kind of thicker and denser and trying to navigate through this, finding methodologies, approaches, ways to have that conversation that helps different people engage with concepts of change on their own terms and collectively is more important than ever.
So We're obviously here at a conference talking about futures and our futures. When you think about your future career, what you want to be, looking 10, 20, 30 years from now, what do you want to be when it comes to being thought of as a futurist or maybe not thought of as a futurist? Elias?
Maybe not thought as a futurist because I still don't necessarily say I'm a futurist, but I like to dabble, right, and not be non-committal, again because it's a place and a space that holds different types of relationships.
Yeah.
But surely keep on doing a lot of what I do, more of it deeper, right, with plenty others.
Okay. And Yila, what about you?
I cannot tell you. I'm a shapeshifter by nature.
I noticed isn't that the name of your firm, Shapeshifter?
Yeah. So I know that I've been working with creative ethnography, with international organizations, with government, with communities, and now I'm learning to work with roots, to collaborate with other beings. So I would like to go in that direction because I think sometimes solutions are developed having a certain future in mind that it's not more than human. So I'm going to try to hack how we understand, for example, scaling up or production or business, but with interspecies collaboration. But who knows?
Yeah. Bree?
Hopefully in 20 or 25 years' time, I will be thinking there are so many people doing this work and they are so fluent and brilliant at doing it that I can probably just step back and retire at that point. But I hope that the community has not only built in it continuing to grow in strength, but also that this is something that is just much more infused in the way that we run and make decisions and govern and think about our everyday lives.
I have to say that I've heard in several presentations here the word hope. Are you all hopeful about the future? Are you hopeful in the work that you do and what it can accomplish, its impact? Bree?
Am I hopeful? I think it probably depends on the day to some extent. But generally, yes, I think we do this work because we have inherent hope. And you see in real time, we see in the past, we see currently so many incredible kind of seeds of what is already happening that can have life blown into it. We see so many kind of potentials and possibilities within that space. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. I think part of doing this work is kind of hope as an active verb, right? Understanding and thinking that we can collectively look at this in new ways and continue those things that are already working, that are already strong through.
Amila, are you hopeful?
Like she said, depends on the day. Most of the days I am. Yeah, but what inspired me, I guess, and gives me hope are all these actions or daily practices that imagine futures otherwise in different places, not like in a forum, but maybe in a community or in a garden. So I think that's what keeps me hopeful.
And Elias?
I often ask myself this question, and I go back to the same question as an answer. Like, what other option do I have? Right? Because honestly, this is as easy as it is for me. What other option do I have? And as we said, this is active hope. I'm skeptical, right? I'm very, very clear about it. I'm skeptical, always skeptical, but at the same time, I'm very hopeful, right? And I think, it is partly the role to open up these options, right? Not holding to them, not being held to them too tightly either. Okay. Continuous work.
That sounds good.
Maybe it's just not hope. I have a friend, I always talk to him, Ko, and he talks about magic and enchantment, and I think it's a bit about that too.
Bring a little magic into our lives.
There's also joy in the practice, right? Yeah. Joy in community in the practice, so that also is part of hope.
Yeah. We have about 10 minutes left, so I'd like to open it up to a couple questions, if you panel don't mind. Folks, do you have a question, sir?
Thank you very much for taking my question. I'm thinking about technology or technological advances through the years. You start with the agrarian revolution and the development of irrigation, and then the development of the printing press, which democratized information, and then the Industrial Revolution and the Information Revolution. All of them seem to, at least to me, to have a commonality. They're all in service to humankind, but they're not an active participant. They're just a tool that was developed. Now we're dealing with artificial intelligence, and there's been serious debate back and forth as to whether this is simply another advance in technology in service to humankind, or whether this technology is sophisticated enough, or in the future will be sophisticated enough to have a seat at the table. Are we at a unique time in history for futurism, I guess would be my question.
Well, panelists, I want you to know I kept my promise. I did not ask a question about AI, but one of our audience members has. So who would like to take this question on? Elias?
I mean, okay.
You look like you were contemplating the
Yeah, I mean, okay. To be, I mean, okay. Wait, and I have to really frame this well, not to appear as anti-technology, which I'm not. I think my challenge with where we are right now, humans versus AI, and especially in the conversation, right? And I'll say I'm no AI expert. I mean, I have my knowledge about it, but what bugs me is that every single time we're having this conversation, the level of critique, right, the level of questioning disappears. And for me, this is, I mean, yeah. So I've been sensing this in conversations today, in conversations yesterday, in conversations for the last few years. Whenever the topic of AI is brought about, automatically, I don't know why, right? But I think this, for me now, is a challenge, and being able to open up these conversations that defy that are the greatest probably contribution I think I can do now, how do we rethink that? Because what we're seeing so far is still questionable, which is fairly acceptable, the technology that is still growing, right? The get-go so far, for me, in general, is not as positive as I'd like it to be. Definitely. I think that was...
Okay. Yeah. Bree or Mila, would either one of you like to jump in on that one?
You asked if this is a unique moment. I think one of the complexities within this particular moment is the sense that things might be moving faster from a technological perspective than they are from the social perspective and the governance perspective in terms of how we can agree to protocols and approaches that, exactly as you say, while this is a tool, we use tools in different ways. Is kind of our behaviours and how we the attitude that we take towards AI. And I think there is often challenges in terms of that kind of speed around how do we come as a society, how do we come as communities to understand what we want from AI. Just because you can do things in this space doesn't necessarily mean you should. In saying that, there are incredible opportunities from AI when I think about things like, for example, looking at climate resilience, like kind of incredible, extraordinary moves within just the last few years around how we are much better able to understand from some of the data, how we are able to kind of act more quickly, and how we are able to navigate and support. So kind of incredible benefit. But I think the particular challenge, the intention we have at the moment is how do we ensure that our governance, that our regulations, and critically our community conversations can actually be had at the speed that is kind of commensurate with how fast technology is moving.
Mila, did you want to comment too?
I think you cannot negate AI because it exists. My question is, who is serving AI? Is AI serving every living being. And I think it's related to what you were saying. It depends on how you collaborate with AI. I mean, there are some projects where, I think the name of the project is SETI. They're working to try to understand the language of whales. So, depends, I don't have an answer. I think that would be a question.
Sure. Is there another question? Yes. And then I see that your question.
Hi, everyone. I'm really curious on the take of the panel on the professionalization of the job, of what a futurist actually means. I'm sure that if any of us will go now on LinkedIn and just put futurist, you'll be surprised of the number that we might see there among your first or second connections. So I'm really curious, how do you, what value or impact you see, or the need of having professionalization of the profession? Thank you.
If I understood it right, correct me if I'm wrong, what is the need for futurists within organizations? Is that fair?
And the need for professionalization of the job, like education.
Oh, the publicization of the. So, Bree, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I think there's two components in this. One is the value in having rigor around how we think about different futures and the methodologies by which we use for that, the languages that we use, having particularly thinking about how do we professionalize in such a way that is ensuring that we are kind of transparent about what we are doing and assumptions, and professionalization has incredible value for that. I think some of the challenges in terms of professionalization is the potential risk that unless we are very careful about this, it will then start to codify ways that we practice the future, and critically who practices thinking about the future in that space. So I was discussing this with some other colleagues from Asia Pacific recently around, do we in fact, is there an impetus to professionalize and to document methodologies and approaches to ensure that we are able to embed that richness and that breadth of approach and the kind of rigor that we need when thinking about futures in that space. So I think it's a bit of a potentially a double-edged sword in terms of either limiting or kind of growing our practice.
Okay. This gentleman had one more. This will be our last question. And Mila, if you'll see what this question is.
Thanks very much for taking my question. So I'm relatively new to the future space, and what I wanted to understand is maybe where the industry as a whole might be heading. My interpretation is that futures, probably unlike a lot of other things, is a skill set that is kind of agnostic to industries. You know, I work in the same space that Bree does. I work for one of her competitors, but you know, you seem to be able to apply it to technology, to a steel mill, to agriculture, whatever it is. For someone like myself who's interested in getting into this space, I want to try to understand where exactly are the opportunities for something that doesn't have necessarily a traditional career path.
So would you say your question is more about the futures industry?
Yeah, in a broad sense, you know, almost akin to almost what she was saying, in the sense that, you know, the professionalization of the industry,
The
you know.
professionalization of it. Okay. Mila, would you like
Sorry,
to?
could you repeat the question?
I think the question is about the professionalization of futurists, and how do we go about that?
I have mixed feelings. I think it's important to, we were talking about this, like to get in certifications or, the rigor you were talking about, but at the same time, it can end up being a club.
Right.
And many people get excluded of that club. So I think we can share methodologies. We can get together in different spaces, and you don't necessarily need a certification. And because I also think that futurists are not only human, but also more than human, trees, fungus. I think that we collaborate and we reimagine futures together, and a mushroom doesn't have a professional certification.
Okay. Bree or Elias, would you like to hear a comment?
I'll pick up on what you've mentioned there around, does it need to be disciplinary? I think what you were kind of asking there
Yeah,
is,
a little bit like that, yeah.
Yeah. I guess there's two ways to take this, right? There's a set of approaches and methodologies and thought processes that can be applied to any field, but to do that responsibly and in a way that is kind of, again, sufficiently thoughtful and rigorous, there is great value in understanding those domains and those fields. And often people who, I think, practice incredibly powerfully, although not exclusively in this space, is people who actually come from a particular industry and then take a futures lens to it rather than the other way around. I think there is a potential risk around making sure that we are practicing kind of rigorously and with a really deep contextual understanding of place and profession and communities that are impacted, unless we have some degree of kind of grounding in the areas that we practice.
Elias, I saw you nodding. Last word?
No, I agree. I mean, probably the last thing I would like to see happening is just having a set of tools and applying them across, right? And as the saying goes, a fool with a tool is still a fool, right? So I think we don't. I would not like us to fall into that, right? Because of just professionalization and certification, what have you. It's more than that. Again, it's an invitation. I see it like that. It's an invitation that is inclusive. So yeah, there's a balance to keep and to be aware of.